Welcome to the Reconnection Club podcast, the show that helps parents heal troubled relationships with their adult sons and daughters. I'm your host, psychotherapist Tina Gilbertson. Each week, I'll offer you compassion, clarity, and personal development tips designed to help you reconnect, not only with your child, but with yourself. Now let's get started. It can be frustrating when parents feel like they're working hard to reconcile with an estranged adult child who, on her part, doesn't seem to be lifting a finger toward making that happen. And I've talked about this very frustration before, especially in episode 50, Should Your Child Meet You Halfway? You can find that at reconnectionclub.com/50. But today, I'd like to discuss another aspect of this asymmetrical effort, and that is the inherently unequal, non-peer nature of the parent-child relationship. Even though your child is now an adult and, of course, responsible for his half of all his relationships, he is still not your peer. That is, you are not equal in all ways in the relationship that you share, and it's very easy to see why that's the case. Let me offer just 3 reasons why you and your child are not now and likely will never be exactly like peers. And then I'll talk about the implications of this inescapable fact. First of all, there was a period consisting of many years when your child or children had to rely on you for everything. They didn't spend years thinking about how to feed you, clothe you, and nurture you. That was all one way. There was a long time when you held the purse strings, the property rights, and you acquired and owned everything they touched in the home. They were entirely reliant on you. This is not typical of any peer relationship. Secondly, you were legally responsible for them. Your child had to ask your permission to do things, to go places, to stay overnight at a friend's house, and so on. If something happened to your child, you would be called and expected to take over and deal with the situation. If, on the other hand, you were underweight or had holes in your clothes, no one would glare accusingly at your child because your child wasn't responsible for your health, your safety, your comfort, or anything. That was all one way too. You were responsible for your child, but he was never responsible for you. Third, you taught your child the basics of how to be a good person and get along with others. If you learned anything from your child, it was a bonus, not a requirement for him to teach you. If your manners failed you, no one would cluck their tongues at your child and try to shame her for your behavior, because it wasn't her job to make sure that you had good manners. Social skills training, like everything else pertaining to your children, was your responsibility, and they learned from you even when you weren't trying to teach them because of the power you held in that relationship. You took on this totally responsible role, not so that you could get something back. You took it on because you are a parent, and making sacrifices for their children and giving to their children is something that people take on when they become parents. It's part of the job, a huge part. But it's no part of being a child, this responsibility, if the child is lucky. And this fact, this unequal exchange of energies while they were growing up, shapes the dynamic between parent and child unalterably. The relationship doesn't suddenly change when your child reaches the age of majority. Being able to vote or drive or buy alcohol or rent an apartment doesn't make your child your peer, not on an emotional level. Legally, yes, you're equals now in the eyes of the law. You're both adults. But in your hearts and minds, you are still parent and child. If you've ever had an encounter with a former boss or supervisor, someone you worked under for a few years in the past, then you've experienced how a feeling of a power differential can linger for years after the fact. And that relationship with your boss was both shorter and, hopefully, less consuming than the average parent-child relationship. So it should be clear that the relative parent and child roles are pretty impossible to shake after being in place for, in most cases, almost 2 decades or more. Those roles may relax somewhat over the course of your lives, but they will probably never change completely. You're still the one who kissed their boo-boos and didn't let them do things that didn't feel safe to you. They're still the ones who didn't understand the world and made poor decisions and needed your help on many occasions. Why should we, as a society, expect everything to suddenly be different after all those years of this unequal dynamic of dependence and responsibility? Relationships between parents and children can evolve over time, of course. They can improve, they can decline, they can grow more comfortable or less so. Your children can get to know you as a person in a way that they never did, and you may come to realize that there are things about them that somehow you didn't always know. Blinders may come off on both sides of the relationship, and you can start fresh with this adult who used to be your child. But underneath these changes, you're still the only one in the role of mother or father to your child, and she's still not your peer. As your child's developmental needs are met, she can continue to mature, and perhaps, depending on multiple factors, she may start to claim more responsibility for the health and well-being of the relationship you share. But this isn't automatic just because she's reached a certain age. For any of us to fully mature, the emotional needs of the children we once were have to be adequately met first. If your adult child is still acting more like an actual child with you, your continued and consistent parenting might be needed to support his maturing. If he's using drugs or alcohol every day and has been doing so for years, he's not maturing emotionally at all. He's still the age at which he started using substances. But in most cases, given sufficient, not exceptional, but sufficient emotional support, people grow up, and the parent-child relationship can evolve in the direction of more equality and an easier closeness. However, you will always be parent and child. Even at your current age, you're still somebody's child. And if your parents are alive, they still think of you that way, as their child. Parents and adult children can enjoy closeness even though they're not peers. But for parents, it's best not to mistake being connected and close with bringing equal energy to the relationship. If you're working on improving a relationship with your adult child, he may not meet you halfway in that endeavor, as I said in episode 50. And while that may be frustrating and make things harder for you, it's not because he's shirking an implicit responsibility. It's because the responsibility for setting the tone of the relationship and ensuring its health has always been up to you. It's never been a relationship of peers. If your child matures enough, he may take it upon himself to meet you halfway. But maturity is not something that can be asked of someone any more than a tree can be requested to grow. Growth and development can be encouraged by a nurturing environment and facilitated by the removal of any barriers to maturity. But that's all that can be done. All plants and animals grow if they can. If growth is stunted, it's because there's either insufficient nurturing or some sort of barrier to growth. So if you're feeling frustrated in your relationship with an adult child because you feel like you have to do all the heavy lifting, remember the history you share that forged the two of you into unequal partners. Trust that your child's refusal to act like a peer is not a moral issue, but at least in part a reflection of the unique asymmetrical nature of the parent-child bond. Do what you can to stay out of the way of your child's growth, and facilitate her maturity by actively respecting any boundaries she may set, paying attention to your own boundaries, and providing visibility and validation whenever possible. You didn't know you'd still be actively and consciously parenting at this stage of the game, but estrangement has made it clear that your role is still a powerful one in the heart and mind of your child. You may not be peers, but in exchange for taking on the challenging role of being a parent, you get to be forever irreplaceable. Until next time, remember that you are a loving, lovable, and still growing human being. So please take good care of yourself. Bye for now. If you've enjoyed this episode of the Reconnection Club podcast, I invite you to check out reconnectionclub.com. The Reconnection Club is for parents at any stage of estrangement from their adult, child, or children. So whether you've just realized there's trouble between you, you've been living with estrangement for years, or you're newly reconciled but still walking on eggshells, the Reconnection Club is your essential resource for information, support, and continued personal growth. With our courses and workshops, expert interviews, monthly Q&A calls, and a friendly, active community, the Reconnection Club is a wonderful place to be for anyone suffering the pain of estrangement from an adult, child, or children. So check it out at reconnectionclub.com.